The day Caleb Turner rode to the train station, he believed he was making the most practical decision of his life. He needed help on the ranch. He needed someone who could cook, keep a house, and perhaps one day raise a family. What he didn't need was change. What he didn't expect was a woman who would challenge every belief he had carried for years. And he certainly didn't expect that the bride he thought he had chosen would end up changing him instead. But before this story reaches its unforgettable ending, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Stories of courage, love, and transformation await you here every week. Chapter 1. The arrival. The steam locomotive screamed as it rolled into the station, sending clouds of white vapor across the wooden platform. Travelers leaned from windows, while workers hurried alongside the train carrying luggage and supplies. Above everything stood the distant blue mountains, watching silently over the frontier town like ancient guardians. Caleb Turner waited near the end of the boardwalk with his hat pulled low over his eyes. At 34 years old, he had spent most of his life alone. His ranch sat 20 miles outside town, surrounded by endless grasslands and stubborn cattle. The work was hard, the winters were lonely, and the days often ended with nothing but silence. For years, he had convinced himself that was enough. But after watching neighboring ranchers build families and homes filled with laughter, he finally admitted something he hated to confess. He was tired of being alone. That realization had led him to a mail-order bride advertisement 6 months earlier. After exchanging several letters with a woman named Eleanor Hart, Caleb had made his choice. Her letters were respectful, simple, practical. Exactly what he wanted. No drama, no complications, just a woman looking for a new beginning. The train finally stopped. Passengers began stepping onto the platform. Caleb straightened his coat and scanned the crowd. Then he saw her. She wasn't what he expected. Eleanor stood taller than most women around her. Her posture was confident, her eyes alert. Instead of appearing nervous or uncertain, she stepped off the train as if she had already decided she belonged there. She carried a worn leather suitcase in one hand and a stack of books tied together with a strap in the other. Books. Caleb frowned. That wasn't something he had imagined. When Eleanor spotted him, she smiled and walked directly toward him. Mr. Turner. Her voice was calm and steady. Wes. She extended her hand. It's good to finally meet you. Caleb hesitated before shaking it. Her grip was surprisingly firm. For some reason that unsettled him. The ride back to the ranch began quietly. The wagon rattled along the dusty road, while golden sunlight stretched across the prairie. Eleanor looked everywhere, at the distant hills, at the grazing cattle, at the rivers winding through the valley. Most newcomers spent their first journey asking questions about town or expressing worries. Eleanor simply observed. Finally, she spoke. It's beautiful. Caleb glanced at her. Most people call it empty. They aren't looking carefully enough. The answer surprised him. For several minutes they rode in silence again. Then Eleanor pointed toward a section of dry land near a creek. Why don't you plant trees there? Caleb blinked. What? The soil looks healthy. Trees could help reduce erosion. He stared at her. You figured that out from a wagon. She smiled. I've studied agriculture. Now Caleb was genuinely confused. Agriculture, along with education, economics, and engineering. He nearly dropped the reins. The woman sitting beside him sounded more like a professor than a bride. That evening they arrived at the ranch. Eleanor stepped down from the wagon and slowly examined the property. The house was sturdy but plain. The barn needed repairs. Several fences leaned at awkward angles. To Caleb, everything looked normal. To Eleanor, it seemed to tell an entirely different story. You work very hard, she said. I do. But you're making some things harder than they need to be. Caleb frowned. What does that mean? Instead of answering directly, Eleanor pointed toward the barn. Tomorrow I'll show you. The confidence in her voice irritated him. This was his ranch, his land, his life. She had been here less than an hour. Yet somehow she already sounded as though she had opinions about everything. That night Caleb sat alone on the porch while stars filled the sky. Inside, Eleanor unpacked her belongings. Among them were notebooks, journals, maps, and more books than he had ever owned in his entire life. He couldn't understand it. This wasn't the quiet, obedient woman he had imagined while reading her letters. This woman had ideas, questions, opinions, and somehow those things made him uncomfortable. Yet beneath that discomfort lurked something else, curiosity. For the first time in years, Caleb found himself wondering what tomorrow might bring. Inside the house, Eleanor stood near the window looking out at the ranch. She wasn't searching for a husband to rescue her. She wasn't running from her past. She had come west for a purpose. The frontier was changing. Communities were growing. Opportunities were appearing, and she believed people could build better lives if they were willing to embrace new ideas. Whether Caleb Turner realized it or not, his life was about to change. Not because he had chosen a bride, but because that bride had arrived determined to help him become more than the man he had always been. And neither of them yet understood how deeply that transformation would affect them both. The next morning, Caleb woke before sunrise, as he always did. For years his life had followed the same pattern. Rise before dawn, feed the horses, check the cattle, repair whatever needed repairing, work until dark, sleep, repeat. Routine was dependable, routine was safe. And until Eleanor arrived, routine had been enough. As he stepped outside carrying a bucket of feed, he expected to find his new bride asleep after the long journey. Instead, he found her sitting at the small table on the porch with a notebook open in front of her. She was already dressed for the day. Several pages were covered in writing. Caleb stopped. "You've been up long." Eleanor looked up and smiled. "About an hour." "What have you been doing?" "Observing." Caleb frowned. "Observing what?" She closed the notebook. "Your ranch." That answer made no sense to him. Most people observed a ranch by walking through it. Apparently, Eleanor observed it by writing about it. After breakfast, Caleb headed toward the barn. Eleanor followed. "You don't have to come," he said. "I know." "Then why are you?" "Because I said I'd show you something." Caleb sighed. Part of him already regretted asking a woman he'd never met to marry him. The barn door creaked as they entered. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the wooden walls. Eleanor slowly examined everything. The feed storage, the stools, the workbench. Then she pointed toward a pile of equipment. "Why is that over there?" "Because that's where it goes." "Why?" But Caleb stared at her. "Because that's where I've always kept it." She nodded thoughtfully. "That's not actually a reason." The words struck him harder than they should have. For a moment he couldn't think of a response. Eleanor walked toward the workbench. "If you move the tools closer to the entrance, you'll save dozens of trips every week." Caleb crossed his arms. "And you know that how?" "I counted." "You counted?" "Yesterday." Caleb looked at her as though she had spoken another language. "Who counted trips inside a barn?" Apparently Eleanor Hart did. Over the next few days, similar conversations happened constantly. Everywhere she looked, she saw opportunities for improvement. She suggested reorganizing storage. She proposed rotating grazing fields differently. She recommended collecting rainwater more efficiently. She even sketched plans for strengthening sections of fencing. At first, Caleb resisted every suggestion. Not because they were wrong, because they were different, and different felt dangerous. One afternoon they argued beside a broken fence. "This system works fine," Caleb insisted. "It works," Eleanor corrected. "That's not the same thing as working well." He rubbed his forehead. "Do you disagree with everything?" "No." "Then why does it feel like it?" Eleanor laughed softly. "Because you're hearing criticism where none exists." Caleb looked away. The truth was uncomfortable. Maybe she wasn't criticizing him. Maybe she was simply seeing possibilities he had stopped seeing long ago. That realization bothered him more than he wanted to admit. A week later, a powerful storm rolled across the valley. Dark clouds swallowed the sky. Thunder shook the earth. Rain poured relentlessly throughout the night. By morning, several ranchers in the area had suffered damage. When Caleb rode out to inspect his property, he expected the worst. Instead, he discovered something surprising. The drainage channels Eleanor had suggested digging days earlier had protected part of the ranch from flooding. Water that might have destroyed valuable grazing land had safely flowed away. Standing in the mud, Caleb stared at the evidence. She had been right. Again. When he returned to the house, Eleanor was reading near the window. "Looks like your idea worked," he admitted. She lowered her book. "That's good." Her response surprised him. No bragging, no celebration, no lecture, just quiet satisfaction. "You knew it would work." "I hoped it would." Caleb sat across from her. For the first time since her arrival, he studied her carefully. Not as a stranger, not as an obligation, but as a person. She wasn't arrogant. She wasn't trying to prove she was smarter. She genuinely wanted things to improve. The difference suddenly mattered. "Why did you come west?" he asked. Eleanor closed her book. The question lingered between them. Finally she answered. "Because I wanted a life where my ideas could matter." Caleb frowned slightly. They didn't matter before. A shadow crossed her face. In the city, most people believed women should remain quiet. And you didn't. No. The answer carried years of experience. Years of frustration. Years of being underestimated. For the first time, Caleb wondered what challenges Eleanor had faced before boarding that train. He had spent years assuming life was difficult because of physical labor, because of droughts, because of storms, because of isolation. Yet Eleanor had clearly fought different battles. Battles no one could see. That evening they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. Golden light painted the mountains. The prairie glowed beneath the fading sky. For several minutes neither spoke. Then Eleanor pointed toward the horizon. "When you first looked at me at the station, you seemed disappointed." Caleb nearly choked. "I wasn't disappointed. You were." He laughed awkwardly. "Was it that obvious?" "Very." For a moment he considered denying it. Instead he chose honesty. "You weren't what I expected." Eleanor smiled. "I know." The surprising thing was that she didn't sound offended. She sounded amused. "And you?" Caleb asked. "What did you expect?" Eleanor looked toward the distant mountains. A man who had stopped dreaming. Caleb turned toward her. "And," her smile softened, "I think I was right." The words should have irritated him. Instead they unsettled him, because deep down he suspected she was right. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped imagining a better future, stopped believing things could change, stopped asking whether there was a better way. He had become comfortable surviving. But Eleanor wasn't interested in merely surviving. She wanted to build, to improve, to grow. And little by little Caleb found himself questioning assumptions he had carried for years. The woman he thought would simply fit into his life was doing something entirely unexpected. She was expanding it. And for the first time, Caleb Turner began to wonder whether the greatest thing arriving on that train hadn't been a bride at all. It had been a new way of seeing the world. The real transformation had only just begun. Weeks turned into months, and the ranch slowly began to change. The fences were stronger. The fields produced more grass. The barn was organized better than it had ever been. Neighbors started asking Caleb how he was improving the property so quickly. At first, he took the credit. Then one day he found himself saying, "It was Eleanor's idea." To his surprise, he felt proud saying it. The biggest change, however, wasn't happening on the ranch. It was happening inside him. Eleanor encouraged him to read books, discuss new ideas, and think beyond the next cattle season. She challenged him whenever he dismissed something simply because it was unfamiliar. One evening, while watching the sunset together, Caleb realized something that startled him. He looked forward to their conversations more than anything else in his day. Not because she agreed with him. Because she made him think. Because she made him better. Then disaster struck. A severe drought spread across the region. Crops failed, water levels dropped, and many ranchers prepared for heavy losses. Fear settled over the valley, but Eleanor remained calm. Months earlier, she had convinced Caleb to build additional water, storage systems, and prepare emergency reserves. Now those preparations were saving the ranch. While others struggled, Caleb's cattle survived. Neighbors began visiting, asking for advice. Eleanor shared her plans freely, helping families protect their own land. Watching her work, Caleb saw something he had missed before. Her strength wasn't loud. It wasn't forceful. It came from wisdom, compassion, and determination. One night, after helping a struggling neighboring family, Eleanor returned home exhausted. Caleb met her on the porch. "You care about everyone," he said softly. She smiled. Someone cared about me once when I needed it. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Caleb took her hand. I thought I was choosing a wife to help run a ranch. Eleanor looked at him curiously, and Caleb smiled. Instead, I found someone who changed my entire life. For the first time since arriving in the West, tears filled Eleanor's eyes, and in that quiet moment beneath the stars, both of them understood something important. The marriage had never been about convenience. It had become something far greater. A partnership, a friendship, and a love neither had expected to find. The greatest journeys don't always begin when we choose a path. Sometimes they begin when the right person changes the way we see it. A year after Eleanor stepped off that steam train, almost nothing about Caleb Turner's life looked the same. The ranch was thriving. New trees grew near the creek. Better fencing stretched across the property. The land produced more than ever before. But the greatest change couldn't be measured in acres or cattle. It was Caleb himself. The man who once resisted every new idea now welcomed them. The man who had spent years living only for work had learned to enjoy life again. One autumn afternoon, Caleb and Eleanor rode to the same train station where they had first met. The wooden platform was busy with travelers beginning journeys of their own. As they stood watching a locomotive arrive, Caleb smiled. "Funny, isn't it?" "What is?" Eleanor asked. "This is where I thought I was choosing a bride." Eleanor laughed softly. "And now?" Caleb took her hand. "No, I know I was finding my future." For a moment they watched families reunite, children laugh, and newcomers step into unfamiliar territory. Just as Eleanor once had. "I was never the woman you expected," she said. "No," Caleb replied warmly. "You were far better." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes, not because of the words, because she knew he meant them. Years earlier, she had arrived carrying a suitcase, a few books, and a heart full of hope. Most people had doubted her ideas. Most people had underestimated her. But one rancher had eventually learned to listen, and because he listened, both their lives changed. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Caleb wrapped an arm around her shoulders. The future remained uncertain, just as the frontier always had been. There would be challenges, hard seasons, but they would face them together. And that made all the difference, because sometimes the person we think we are choosing ends up becoming the person who transforms us. Caleb thought he was choosing a bride. Instead, she changed him, and in changing him, she gave him something he never knew he needed: a larger heart, a broader vision, and a life filled with purpose, love, and possibility. If you enjoyed this heartfelt frontier story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes people can change each other's lives for the better. Remember, the strongest love is not the love that keeps us the same. It is the love that helps us become the best version of ourselves.